questions for Coach Johnson?
As it, I guess one practice before 8A, just kind of overview how you think the defense is done.
There's been some really positive things. We were so much further ahead this year than last year, as we should be, on scheme and other things like that. The frustrating part of it is we've had a lot more nagging injuries this year than we did last year. And we've had some guys that we really felt we needed to be a little bit cautious with in certain drills. And the combination of the two, I don't think we've had nearly as physical and probably as full a spring as we would have liked to. Some of that's a good thing, though. When you got players that you trust and you believe they know what they're doing, and you don't have to rep them in certain situations because you want to be smart. That's a good thing. But we had probably about a dozen guys that either missed all of spring practice or a great portion of spring practice, and they were guys that really had a legitimate shot to jump into the two deep battle. And that's frustrating when you don't get to work with those guys. I know it's frustrating for them too. That would be the only negative I would say about our spring, is that there was several guys that really needed those opportunities that couldn't get in there.
Ellis, what are you hoping to get out of the 8A game on Saturday?
Well, we want it to be a good scrimmage, but we're going to be a little bit prudent about certain players playing too many snaps. Again, last year we were so deep, we were able to have a pretty good scrimmage out there, even with a few guys missing. This year we got a lot more missing. We don't know the final on it yet. There were a couple of guys, actually got a couple of guys like TJ. He got back today. Be curious to see how he felt with that hamstring. But there are a couple in that situation who have missed 2 or 3 weeks, and they will be able to go Saturday, I hope. But there are several guys who will not be able to go full speed because of injuries. But I still think it's going to be a good day. I think we'll have enough guys out there. We'll have some good full speed work. We really have not had a full live scrimmage in about two full weeks.
Who do you expect to kind of take it easy on?
I'm sorry?
Who are you expecting to take it easy on?
Well, they're just some of the older players. I don't want to go through the whole list because Coach hadn't made the final decision yet. But when you've got a player like Reese Dismukes, who started for 3 years and going to be a 4-year starter, and we don't have proven depth behind him, you got to be smart. Because if we lost him to a serious injury Saturday, he wouldn't be back for the season. So there's some issues like that. I think the coach has got to make some very prudent decisions.
Talk about Kamaya here. I know he's had to miss some practice. Is he going to be back sometime soon?
I don't know, but he's a great example of what I was talking about earlier. He was on that edge of being able to fight for one of those 2 deep spots and missed quite a bit of practice. So I don't know if he'll be ready to go yet or not.
How's it behind Cass and Chris at linebacker? That's kind of stuck up.
Well, frankly, Cass hasn't had a very good spring. He bruised his tailbone really bad after about 3 practices. In his middle 6 to 7 practices, 3 or 4 of them he didn't practice. And the other 3 or 4, he was never full speed. Now, the last 2, he's had some good practices. And, I think he's going to be fine. He needed a spring. He needed a good spring. I know he was a starter last year, but he's still a relatively young linebacker. I wish he would have had more work. I pulled some off of Chris Frost as the spring wore on in order to give him to Kahari Harding, who we moved from boundary safety about 5 practices ago. But to answer your question right now, it's Kenny Flowers, Cameron Toney, and Kahari Harding. And all of them have had a pretty good spring. I'm really happy about Kahari's progress because when you move a player like that, and I don't think he's ever truly played inside linebacker, played down the other box quite a bit. But when you move a player like that, you never know how it's going to work out. Usually in the first couple of practices, you can tell whether it's going to fit or not. He's had a really good spring. I'm very optimistic about what he's going to be able to do for us next year.
As that said, Casanova was learning the middle position this spring. When he's not on the field for 2 or 3 practices, and the first 2 you don't place a high value on because there's not in pads, how much of this missed time is going to cost him an opportunity to learn that position?
It was a big hamper. It set him back quite a bit. The first 3 practices, he really moved into it really easily. When I first got here, I thought he was the Mike linebacker, but he wouldn't talk. didn't communicate well at the line of scrimmage, things of that nature. Chris was a little bit quicker. Jake had a lot more experience, and that was the primary reason that they ended up where they did. There's not a lot of difference in the prototype Mike and Will in this system. They've got to do some very similar things. But his transition to that position was really effortless. It was easy. I just wish he hadn't missed so much time, because I think fundamentally he hasn't improved. And he's still, like I said, a relatively inexperienced linebacker who would have gotten a lot better with spring. But the Mike Will exchange between him and Frost has gone very well.
I know you talked in the past about making sure you have a defense that can pretty much play against anybody. How much, in your opinion, over the years, has just versatility on defense, players being able to be versatile in pass coverage, can come up and stop the run as well? How much has that kind of evolved and kind of become more and more important over the years?
You mean in general in football?
Yeah.
It's very important. The game has become more spread out on all levels, and quarterbacks throw the ball better than they used to because they're learning how to throw it at a younger age. High schools are teaching very complicated and very well polished passing games, and kids are coming to college as both receivers and quarterbacks, and for that matter, pass protection. But they're coming to the college level really a lot better than they ever were 15, 25 years ago at doing those things. So it's a different style of football now with most teams. On the other hand, you know, still if you're gonna win a championship at Auburn, you're probably gonna have to go through Georgia, LSU, and Alabama, and they're all power football teams. They're not spread. So it's very difficult, you know, from game to game. Sometimes it changes quite a bit. But even those teams, they can spread the field. They all throw the ball extremely well, and they have great receivers. And it's just, you know, it's hard to play with the old prototype linebacker that could stop the run and was very much of a liability in coverage. They got to be able to run these days. And one of the other things that we put a huge premium on in trying to recruit is length, not just height, but arm span, those type things, because there's so much is done now in pass coverage and blitzing and other things where arm length and overall length is such a big factor.
Ellis, can you talk about how Carl Lawson's done this spring, plus Gabe and Montravis added in? How are they doing there?
Carl's had a great spring. Our objective with Carl, we know he's a good player, and he made some really dynamic plays last year as a true freshman. What our objective with him this spring was to make him a good overall every down player, better at the point of attack, better at learning some of our twist schemes and maybe some of our blitzes and other things and adjustments. And he's had a really good spring. He's a much more complete player than he was, and still has that ability to bring the dynamic plays on third down too. Elijah pulled a groin, I think, about 20 minutes into the first practice. He did get back 2 practices ago. He's had a couple of good practices, but he was one of the ones I mentioned earlier. Spring practice could have been so beneficial to him, and he had a very, very average spring practice because of the misses and the practices he couldn't go. Who else did you ask about?
About Montravis and Gabe.
Montravis.
Outside.
Montravis, very unselfishly, he and Gabe had to move outside to defensive end. We were out of bodies. It was something that we thought about earlier in his career anyhow, because he's so athletic. But he's done a heck of a job out at defensive end. So did Gabe. It's given us an idea also in looking toward next fall. We'll have a big package that we can play 4 bigger linemen in certain situations. They got a lot of work at that, and I think that will be something we will utilize against some of those teams I was talking about. When you got a 295-pound end and a 200, maybe 300-pound end, and both of them run under 5 flat, one of them runs about 4.7. I think we could really help ourselves in some of those power football teams we play, and still stay within our base system.
Ellis.
But they did a good job, and sort of unselfish as they've been double training all spring.
Ellis, when you look back at last spring, what was the one thing you hoped would ring true going into the fall that did? And then what do you hope rings true this spring going into next fall?
I think the biggest thing probably is we thought we had a lot of just good, solid football players on the field in spring. We didn't see the big-time dynamic playmakers. but we thought we identified a few as the spring wound down, and, you know, Chris Davis and D Ford and some of those guys did turn out to do those things for us. But the thing that we saw in the spring was a deep football team. And if you go back to last fall, we played a lot of people. At times, we didn't play consistently. Maybe that contributed to it, but we played really well for the most part in the fourth quarter. In about every game, we made some really big plays, and I think it's because we played a lot of guys, especially up front.
What do you see this spring that you kind of hope?
Well, this
translates?
spring, we're just, right now, we're just making a lot of plays that we didn't make last spring. Familiarity within the system, making quicker and better adjustments on formations, and playing better within the system with each other. We're just a lot better. We're a lot further along than we were this time last year. And if the injury bug doesn't jump up and grab us, I think depth is going to be developed. We're feeling a lot better about our safeties now and the depth there. We got some incoming help in the front, you know, with Elijah and L.O. Ladarius not practicing this spring. It looked extremely thin out there, but they'll be back. Plus, we got 2 junior college players coming in. So I think we'll be fine. Maybe not quite as deep as last year, but I think the quality of depth may be better.
Ellis, do you feel you have a good grasp on the holes you needed to fill and who's gonna do it? I know cash is limited, you were working in the secondary to figure out who's gonna replace Chris Davis, and Halsey wasn't able to do much this spring, but do you feel you have a decent grasp of who's gonna fill those holes?
Yep, we still feel like with Halsey coming back, that we've still got a wild card. You know, we feel fine about the guys that went this spring, but in the back of your mind, you have to feel like Halsey was a legitimate starter, and whose job is he gonna take? Because the 4 that finished the spring, Jonesy and Mincy and Whitehead and Moncrief, all had good springs. And then Rudy, Jonathan Ford, he and some of the other guys made great progress, and we've got a lot of confidence in them right now. All that being said, I just gotta believe that Josh Halsey will come back and probably gonna get in the fight for a starting job. Is he gonna be the boundary safety? Is he gonna be the boundary corner? You know, where are we gonna need him the most? So we've got some question marks, but they're not the type of question marks where we're not sure who can do this. It's more of who's gonna win that battle and who's gonna be that number 1 guy and who's gonna be the number 2 guy.
What would you say the biggest challenge you faced this spring so far?
Probably just trying to make progress with so many guys out, and I think we have. It was, sometimes we felt like we were treading water as an entire unit. But, you know, when some of those guys were out, from a positive standpoint, it gave some other individuals a chance to get better.